Woo! It's time for that Wednesday Q&A, and ooh, man, I got to tell you. So I am, shall we say, I'm on location, and I'm using Stephanie's Shure microphone. In fact, no, not the Shure. What? Oh, the Shure is the...
Shure is the USB converter.
The Shure is the USB converter. I'm using her Neumann mic. So, here comes the lovely,
I'm going to get on
Dr.
here
Stephanie
and
Murphy.
explain the audio setup. So we're using the Neumann TLM 102 mic, which is a very, very good mic.
Yeah.
It's used by the NPR broadcasters, I think, to do their sets on location. And the way we hook that up to a computer is just with a regular mic stand, like a table mic stand. And then we have the Shure XLR to USB converter. It's the X2U, the Shure X2U XLR to USB converter. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, I'll put on a nice stand.
Yep, I mentioned the stand.
Oh, you did?
Sweetie,
Sorry,
yes.
yeah. All right.
And so carry on. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, please. They love to hear your voice. So, but I mean, and it sounds so good on this mic. Holy shit. I mean, like, I love a good old-fashioned Yeti.
You get what you pay for.
Yeah, well, I guess so. Jeez. So anyway, Stephanie, thank you so much for letting me use the mic.
Should buy you one.
Well, I have a new Yeti in my wish list, actually, at wishlist.zog.ninja, but I don't have a Neumann. Maybe I need to shake that up. So, because we're still working on building a second studio. But anyway, yeah, boy, I love the sound that comes out of this thing. I mean, I'm not even in the best of acoustic environments here, and I feel like I listen back and it just sounds so damn good. Anyway, so why don't we get into this week's Q&A? We are just coming off of Kalenda. Merry Kalenda, or Christmas is, perhaps lesser people call it. No, I'm just kidding. There aren't lesser people. Well, I'm going to break into that because I didn't get into episode 205 of Sovereign Tech. I did not get to, we ran out of time talking about various stories, and we covered that great TED Talk that I thought was so important. But I didn't get into the the historical depiction of Kalenda or Saturnalia in all of this, and so maybe I'll be able to get into that today. But we've got a ton of we have a few tech questions to get into this week that I want to break into, and of course I want to say welcome to the new patrons that have signed on. Got a few this week, and thank you so much for that. Just an absolute honor to have everybody on board with Patreon that's on board with it. It means the world to me. And it really, it says, hey, I really appreciate what you're doing. Not to say that if you're not a patron, you don't say that in other ways, but this is just one of those really great ways. And I hope you're enjoying, for all the new listeners, you may have noticed you have a custom RSS feed that you access that you can put right into your podcast app. And and it's totally controlled through Patreon. It works really, really nicely. So I hope you're appreciating that. Anyway, enough. Let's get into no, you know what? Not enough. I just want you to know, yes, I will be back in the studio come episode 206. And the new intros might not be completely done by then. But we'll make sure that this New Year's is getting rung in right. And if anything, by, the first episode of New Year's, we should be, because the first episode of New Year, yeah, okay, so, right. So the first episode of Sovereign Tech that will actually be released in 2017, I will make sure has the new intros. So appreciate everybody's patience on that. It's been a hell of a year, and that's something to really, maybe that's kind of a way to start the show. And I'm a little annoyed. So because a lot of people, how many deaths have there been since, honestly, this is getting released on December 28th, 2016, and December 28th, 2015, frankly, for me, was when this string of deaths of, of heroes, people that I looked up to, or people that I just recognized as having tremendous talent, or that perhaps played the soundtrack to some of the very enjoyable moments of my life. But that's when it all started, and that's when Lemmy Kilmister, of course, of Motorhead fame. I'm a huge Motorhead fan. And I won't speak of Motorhead in the past tense, even though the band has effectively said that they've hung up the leather. But that happened on December 28th, 2015. It was a battle with cancer. Not a funny subject at all. And it was, Well, after that, I mean, it just started hit. Prince, David Bowie. I mean, and the laundry list of actors, goes on and on and on. And of course, George Michael died just recently. I think it was on Christmas Day or just before. And I had said on social media, I was like, boy, Last Christmas really takes on a whole new meaning now, doesn't it? I'm a huge George Michael fan, have been for a long, long time, even into his more recent work, like his last kind of, and it was a fairly big hit when he came out with Patience. I want to say that was in 2000. When was that? 2007, 2008, something like that, off of one of his later albums. He died at like 53, and apparently it was due to, drug abuse, heroin and whatever else. And I only say drug abuse in the fact that it killed him. Otherwise I wouldn't, necessarily say that it was abuse. What a pity. What a loss to just a tremendous talent and a guy that really paved the way at a time when homosexuality and alternative sexuality was not widely accepted. This is a guy who was a major celebrity that said, no, you know what? I'm going to run with this. And he did, and has just, written some of the greatest music of all time. Of course, Freedom 90, everybody knows the song Faith, but I mean, the list goes on, and not even counting Wham! That he did with Andrew. Well, I can't remember the second member of Wham's name, but anyway, that's a guy that, boy, he dropped off the map, even though he tried to do a little solo career in the 90s, I remember. But anyway, that was, that was really a hit. And what was really rough was that I believe earlier the same, or it wasn't earlier the same day. I believe it was Sunday morning this week that, or maybe it was Saturday night, that it was talked about that on a flight from London to LAX, to Los Angeles, that Carrie Fisher had a heart attack while she was on a plane. Carrie Fisher, of course, I would hope I don't have to mention it, or have to say it, but Carrie Fisher, of course, was, she played Princess Leia in Star Wars, and did so many other things. I mean, I even enjoyed her in Drop Dead Fred, one of my favorite movies of all time. And she's done so much work. Her novels, her writing, her script editing, her script sweetening is sometimes they call it. So I don't know if I'm going to get into the whole Carrie Fisher thing right now, but she passed away. I believe that would have been yesterday's December 27th, 2016, or at least that's when it was reported. And, I'll just say this much. It fucked up my day. Like that, the celebrity deaths have been rough. Like Prince dying was rough. Lemmy dying was rough. Some of Bowie dying, certainly was a bit rough. I mean, Leonard Cohen, I mean, that wasn't like so rough, but Carrie Fisher just that one hit hard. Like that was, she was 60, which is young. I mean, personally, I think, any age is young. I mean, even people that die at 100, I think it's very young. And part of the reason I say that's not just being, quippy or being, just trying to be a contrarian or anything, or trying to be, I don't know. I mean, yes, I'm a firm believer that life extension technology is very close, to hitting the streets. But I say that because, in my family, of course, I come from a rather large Jewish family, and most of my, great uncles, great grandparents, a lot of my relatives, I mean, they all died in their 90s, and I'm sure some of them even died were centenarians. And it's interesting to point out, I mean, that today there are more centenarians walking the earth than there ever have been. Centenarians meaning that you're 100 years old or older. So, I mean, that speaks well enough to, our ability to extend life, because, I mean, that's a massive jump. Not to say that, I think the average age of death might actually be dropping a bit. Of course, what adds to that? Is it sickness, or is it, just the rampant amount of wars going on that brings down? I mean, that's a whole other subject. But point being is that 60 is young. Is very, very young to be dying. I mean, there's a lot of people who say 60 is the new 40. And I certainly think that's very true. and then that of course trickles down. 30 is the new 20. Hell, most 30-year-olds I know act like they're 18. Not to say, I mean, I'm 35, not to say I'm any different either. I really haven't, changed much from, well, should I say I kind of reverted in a good way to sort of my time before the military. Anyway, that's people have asked me to talk about my military experience on Q&As. I may get to that in some episodes. This is not going to be the one. But I will certainly talk about what I can. I don't mind those kinds of questions. So, but anyway, to stick on the subject, but I mean, just a ton of deaths this year. I mean, 2016 has been a crazy, crazy year. There's some personal deaths that happened in my life that I feel absolutely terrible about and broken up about. But I'm a little annoyed. I'll say this, and maybe I'll talk more about Carrie Fisher later. I'm a little annoyed at the amount of people that are really being crass in saying, they're being assholes in saying that, wow, you're blaming everything on a year instead of striking at the root of the problem. Shut the fuck up. Don't marginalize people's feelings and let them blame, go ahead, let them blame a year. Okay. And because a year is a personification of what came. I mean, that's automatically assuming that these people don't know why this shit is happening and what the root causes are. Shut up. It's one of the biggest problems of social media I mean, the quippiness, in blaming 2016 certainly is a byproduct, I think, of social media. But then, like, just the offhand writing, just writing off how people's feelings is crazy. Or just like, I mean, there's plenty of people, laying out there, well, wow, you're complaining about 2016 when you're sitting in an air-conditioned room, holding your smartphone. Like, what the hell are you complaining about? This is first world problems. People die all the time, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, people do die all the time, but there are people, that have different effects on your life. Not everybody has the same effect on your life. So when certain people die, it means something more. And just because you have a goddamn smartphone doesn't mean that your feelings are inconsequential. Doesn't mean that, that your sense of loss or whatever should be completely ignored. You can have all the technology in the world, but you can still have, struggles with internal demons, struggles with, sadness in your life that you don't have control over. I mean, you can still have all these things. It's very annoying that people get that goddamn heartless. 2016 was a shitty year. I mean, you don't have to blame 2016. I mean, who the fuck's really doing that? Come on. Like, I mean, it's just such a dick move, to rip on people for that. And it's not funny. So anyway, I didn't want to start the show off with something so serious. But I want to get into some tech questions here because we've got some great ones. But before I do that, I'm going to start try to start a new tradition here with the Wednesday Q&As. And what I want to do is a picture of the week, and I'm going to integrate this picture into onto the Patreon page. When you go to the show notes for this episode, I don't know if it's going to actually show up in the show notes. It might. On your podcast app. And if it does, that's really cool. But I haven't had the opportunity to test it. So I'm going to test it this week to see how well that works. If not, of course, you just go to sovereigntech.com. You find this episode, which I believe this will be episode 24 as far as the questions and answers. And maybe it'd be episode 44 of the subscriber episodes. And you could, of course, see the picture there. And the picture this week is it's hilarious. It's hilarious and sad, kind of, at the same time. And it's very representative of what's going on today and, of 2016 in general. And that is, so someone took a shot from Hubble, from the Hubble Space Telescope, of course. And it's this, kind of a gaseous cloud, effectively. Yeah, I mean, I don't exactly think it's a nebula. I was trying to find out what the origin of the actual shot was. But anyway, it's this long blue-hued trail, and it has, and this is why I say it's a nebula, because you're seeing either some degree of stars through it, or the shot is maybe some degree of a nursery, or there's a supernova going on, whatever. Anyway, so the thing is that it looks just like, and you got to see this picture. You got to go to the Patreon page if you want to see it. It looks just fucking like the Doomsday Machine from Star Trek, from the original series, from the classic episode, The Doomsday Machine. and I mean, the picture's been making the rounds, and I saw it, and I just shared it around. I was just like, I just want you to know that 2016 just got worse because here comes the Doomsday Machine. Of course, the Doomsday Machine was this like, theoretically indestructible, massive device. Like, I mean, it was it was however many, multitudes different or larger in size than the Enterprise itself. Of course, the Constitution class. And so, I mean, this thing, eats entire planets and, again, was theoretically indestructible, except for by, of course, Commodore Matt Decker, but in the episode. But damn, it's such a great shot. So look for that. If it's in the show notes, great. You can actually let me know. Well, I mean, I'll see it on my feed as well if it showed up. But you can let me know, or you can let me know what you think of the picture. Or if it doesn't show up there, of course, just go to the Patreon page, go to sovereigntech.com, and you can see the picture yourself. But I just thought it was damn funny. Here comes the Doomsday Machine, and baby, you ain't stopping it. Certainly not without a Constitution-class starship. So anyway, all right. Let's get into these tech questions. Let's break off of that because we've got some good ones here. And actually, one of these, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to help out. To give you a better breakdown of what to do. So the first question, I'm going to get into two as far as tech particularly. One's going to have to do with two-factor authentication, which has become a major subject again, and I'm glad it has. But the first one I'm going to get into is about ripping, what they call ripping, which is burning, converting down DVDs and Blu-rays and all this. So, and this coincides very nicely. This question coincides very nicely with the version 1.0. This is remarkable. Version 1.0 of Handbrake was finally released actually yesterday, which is why I dug this question out of mothballs. Because, that's huge. I mean, Handbrake was started like 13 years ago. It's an awesome piece of software. It's been great forever. I've been using it for a very, very long time. It's an excellent editing and converting tool. I mean, it just really, really does the job. And so version 1.0 came out finally 13 years later. Good for them. Maybe that's how it'll be with Bitcoin. Finally, Bitcoin will hit version 1.0 in another, 5 years or something like this. But yeah, really, really great piece of software. So now the nice thing is that, in many ways, Handbrake is kind of what Audacity is to audio. And of course, Audacity is the best sound software in the world, in my opinion. Well, what Audacity is to audio, Handbrake is to video. And what's interesting about that is that, you want to use, there's other software out there. There's any video converter. That's what they call it. Any video converter is actually free software, and that's really good. You can get a free version of it. The problem is you got to be careful when you install, because it will install, some pretty ugly bloatware onto your computer if you're not really careful when you go through the install process. In fact, there's a point where it won't even show you the check boxes to uncheck for it. You just have to click there's a little link. You have to click more or something like that. It's a pain in the ass. So I'm not necessarily recommending using that. And of course, it's also not cross-platform, nor is it open source. It's where Handbrake is on everything. It's on Mac, Windows, Linux. I mean, and I've run it on FreeBSD. So, it works everywhere. And it's a little tricky to be able to say rip DVDs from that. Now, Blu-rays is a bit of a different story, because the other thing that we used to have to use, or that we would use for ripping, DVDs and Blu-rays. DVDs I have a longer history with. Blu-rays I generally just buy outright. But I would use from what used to be, the company used to be called Slysoft. Now it's called Red Fox. And Slysoft, they sold any DVD. That's literally just the name of the software, is any DVD. And they had other pieces of software as well. Clone DVD Mobile, Clone CD. They have all kinds of, and honestly, it's great software. The problem is it's fucking expensive. It really costs a lot. And in fact, to rip Blu-rays, so Handbrake is the software I recommend using for ripping DVDs and Blu-rays, but to rip Blu-rays, you pretty much need to get any DVD. And it's not only that any DVD is expensive now, and I'm not saying it's not worth the price. I mean, we're talking literally, it costs over $100. But it's like a subscription model now. Ever since it became Red Fox, which we talked about this on a Sovereign Tech Prime episode, or I think earlier this year it happened. But I mean, again, it's really, really expensive to do it. To rip a Blu-ray. So unless you have like gigantic collections, maybe that you're trying to get rid of, or you have if you're trying to create like some sort of streaming service or something in your house, which we could talk about that if anybody ever wants to ask questions about that. It's really not worth it. So, but if you have that huge DVD collection, you can actually So just like with, and again, I'm going to use this comparison of Audacity, just like with Audacity, there is the DLL file, the lame enc, right? .dll that allows you to convert to MP3 and export as MP3. There is the same idea. There's a DLL library, library file that called libdvdcss. Now you can find the download link for it in the link that I'm putting in the episode for this episode of Q&A. And you do the same thing. You just put it into the Handbrake folder, and you can instantly go about ripping DVDs into various formats using Handbrake. So it's an awesome solution, and it's totally free. So like you don't have to pay for any DVD whatsoever, and it will break. I'm pretty sure it breaks any. I mean, I can't say for certain because I haven't tested every DVD, obviously, and certainly not many as far as new ones go. But it can break any DVD's encryption or any other, not any DVD, the software, any DVD you throw at it. It can break its encryption because I don't think the MPAA and whoever else is spending much time trying to keep the encryption process refreshed and new for DVDs anymore. I can't say that for certain, but that's my guess that's what's happening. Blu-ray is a different story. I think there is that constant arms race between companies like Red Fox, previously Slysoft, and of course Sony and whoever else is making all the encryption schemes for Blu-rays and whatever else. I mean, and now the trick that they're trying to put on is that the encryption, or the decryption, I should say, of being able to play the Blu-ray happens at the Blu-ray player. And I imagine a lot of that has to do with sort of why they've gone with what is a UHD now, where it's a 4K Blu-ray, right? That's the new hotness. Probably part of that is so that they can, I mean, first off, they need to sell a new model, and and this allows them to resell movies to you. And 4K, I still don't know how I feel about that. Like I'll be the first to tell you that once you get above 1080p, frankly, I don't think like that there's a huge difference, and there's so little 4K content out there. In fact, I mean, from a consumer level, and I've talked about this on Sovereign Tech Prime many times, on a consumer level, like 4K is a terrible idea because I think this is an actual scheme by like, various ISPs, Comcast and all the rest of them, to where they're going to charge you by the gigabyte, right? For, that's something they're starting to do. Or how, if you go use so many gigabytes or so many terabytes of data, your data, it's unlimited, but you're going to have to pay eventually, for every following 10 gigabytes that you use on just your home, internet connection. We're not talking about a mobile data plan here, just in your home. You'll have to pay up for that. I think for Comcast, I thought it was something like 300 gig. It can't be 300 gig. Anyway, whatever their plan is, whatever their structure is that they're doing for that. But the problem here is that, okay, they want to schlep off, or like streaming services want to put 4K on you, and then the ISPs are jacking up, the prices of your plan depending on how many gigabytes you use, and 4K is going to kill your gigabytes. Right? So I feel like 4K is problematic in a lot of ways. And I'm still not like 100. I mean, I've seen a 4K screen. I've seen a 4K movie getting played. Like I've seen Star Trek Beyond getting played and all that. And I mean, it looks nice, but I don't know, down the line, years down, I'm not convinced. I've yet to be convinced that anything above 1080p, is really something to actually give a shit about. Really give a shit about. I mean, there's new sound technologies that are interesting, like Dolby Atmos. I love the idea of 3D sound and all that. Like that's really cool. But it's like 3D. I mean, 3D TVs are almost dead now, I mean, like that's a technology that's just gone. So anyway, myself, frankly, like, and honestly, like 720p is fine for me. Having the content and having it in a very portable, an easily storable way is so much more important to me than it having all the luscious crispness, of 4K. I just, that doesn't really appeal to me, because, well, I mean, if, how to put that? All the things that I like to watch, all the things that I like to have and like to be able to share with people. I mean, I'd easily fill a house with all of those discs, or I'd easily fill, they don't sell a hard drive that could hold all of my shit in 4K. They just don't. So it's up to you what's more important, and anyway, with Handbrake, you can choose what resolutions you want to go with. You can go with very small files, whatever you want to do. And it does a beautiful job. So I put a guide, a more detailed guide actually from Paul Thurrott. I put that in the show notes for this episode of the Q&A. And you can check it out, and follow the process there. But kudos to the team at Handbrake. I mean, finally getting to 1.0, 13 years later, and that's all right. I mean, these guys weren't like really getting paid for making it, but it is in many ways become the standard. I talked about using, because when any video converter, which is what I recommended before, when that started doing that ugly little bloatware trick, I mean, people asked me, and this is when I used to do questions and answers on Sovereign Tech proper. They asked me, well, what do we use now? And I told them right out, use Handbrake. And so for it to be, out of beta 13 years later, fucking great. So that's the way to go about it with ripping DVDs. I would use that. If you're asking about, this is something maybe that article that I shared, didn't get into. If you're asking about like what drives to get, if you are willing to go out and like, maybe you don't have a DVD drive or something, I would get something I would invest in. And because this is interesting how you could work this out. There's a technology called MDisk. I'm a huge fan of this. I talked about it when it first came out, 2-3 years ago on Sovereign Tech. But MDisk it's effective. I mean, it's DVD or Blu-ray that it comes in both flavors. And it is but what makes it up, and it works with any Blu-ray player or any DVD player, you have to have a specific different type of player to write to it. Okay, Blu-ray or DVD. But it will work in any player that you throw at it. And it has a different makeup than your average, piece of plastic. Okay. Now it's going to feel in many ways, maybe a little more denser, but it's going to feel just like a DVD or a Blu-ray. But MDisks are effectively made out of stone. And they have a shelf life, shall we say, not a literal one, but effectively a shelf life of 1,000 years. As for the average DVD, especially burnable DVD, you're lucky if it lasts you 10. In fact, you're lucky if it lasts you a year. Burned DVDs can be problematic if they're not stored like in a really, really, I don't want to say careful fashion, but in a specific fashion. Because these things warp and all that and blah, blah, blah. So MDisk is really cool. So if you're ripping your DVD collection, you probably want to put it onto a hard drive, that would kind of be the attraction. But maybe you're the kind of person, because I used to be this way, where what I like to do is I like to rip the DVDs, turn them all into AVIs or MP4s or whatever. And OGG video wasn't a thing at the time, because I'd love to just use open source, codecs. But and I would be able to put, instead of having six seasons in some kind of crazy box set for some show, I would be able to put all of that into, I could put an entire series onto, say, one dual layer DVD, right? That's a very attractive option to do, is to, break it all down just into less discs. And then you can play it on whatever you want. And I mean, an MDisk is going to easily last longer than any of your hard drives are going to last. So if you're looking for, kind of archival solutions, you want to grab an MDisk burner, and they're cheap, especially if you're just doing DVD and not Blu-ray. Like an MDisk burner, you can get for like $30. That's USB and it does the business. Or, if you want, I don't know what model exactly has, just because there's not a lot of clarity on this. Like, if you're buying new hardware, it makes sense to future-proof it. And I wouldn't blame you for wanting to buy a drive, an optical drive that has Blu-ray 4K or, Blu-ray UHD, but then it also can burn MDisk Blu-rays and MDisk DVDs. You're probably going to pay a pretty good price for that, because I know, like, just the players alone that I know of that handle UHD, or, Blu-ray 4K, we'll call it that, costs like $400 right now. That's one of the things that's exciting about the new Xboxes, is that they can play these 4K Blu-rays, and they're at a really low price point, and you're getting a game system besides. So I'm not 100% certain what drive to get as far as that goes, but I mean, the DVD option, I have one that actually Sovereign Tech listeners purchased through wishlist.zog.ninja for me, and I have every episode of Sovereign Tech. Just about. I'm getting to the point where I have to make a second disc, or a new disc, I should say, an updated disc. But I have, various generations of discs that have every single episode of Sovereign Tech on them. And so as long as 1,000 years from now, they have an optical drive that can recognize a DVD and they can play MP3s, 1,000 years from now, literally, people could be listening to Sovereign Tech. That's a very exciting prospect to me. I mean, obviously, who the hell wouldn't want to do that? So I love that. I love that whole technology. I love that whole idea. But yeah, link in the show notes for how exactly to go about using Handbrake, and where to download that free, the library file, the DLL file, libdvd CSS, to be able to do it. But it works smashingly, just works great. As far as ripping Blu-rays, yeah, it depends on how many Blu-rays you have. There's a way to do it, and there's actually a link for how to do it as well, in the same story that I'll be sharing with you. But you might just want to go with like any DVD, and even use they have a great solution called Clone DVD Mobile that lets you convert into all different kinds of file formats. It does a great job. I used that software for some time as well, because it was it was just really nice the way that it would handle, say, the file structures of DVDs and everything. So hope that answers that question. Anyway, appreciate that. I had that one sitting for a while, and once I saw the announcement this morning that Handbrake went to Handbrake 1.0, I was like, oh, now's the time to bring that up. Okay, let's get into another. This is a much deeper technical subject, and then maybe we can break into some other things here in just a minute. So this has to do with two-factor authentication, and let me get the exact question up here. So I've only recently become aware of how vulnerable 2FA, or two-factor authentication, can be. Or second factor authentication, a lot of different ways people say that, and how easily it can be cracked. Kind of surprising to me, since everyone seems to yell from the mountaintops about how it's the gold standard of personal security. Any ideas or recommendations for dealing with this, if any? Okay, so here's the thing with two-factor authentication. Now, this is a great thing, and I've been recommending it for years. As soon as it's been largely available, I say do it. And there's been some recent stories that have been a little scary. Like some people, some luminaries, say, in the Bitcoin space have had their Bitcoin stolen because someone was able to effectively crack. Again, hacking is a heroic act. Cracking is malicious, and theft is malicious. Was able to crack into somebody's wallet because they broke, or they quote unquote broke. Now you're going to have to give me the time to explain this, because I'm using very, simple terms here. Okay. But they broke this person's second factor authentication, or two-factor authentication. And so what more particularly where there's problems with two-factor authentication. Now understand that there's a few different ways that two-factor authentication can work. Okay. The most popular and the most ubiquitous is using SMS. Effectively, you give a company your phone number, say Google, and then Google will, when you try to log into your account somewhere, if you have second factor authentication turned on, Google will text you usually like a 6-digit code. And then you will have to enter that 6-digit code into a field, on the website, and then you'll be able to get in there. But it'll send a literal SMS message to your phone. Okay, and that's how that ends up working. So there's that way. You can use like an actual authenticator key that gets developed, that gets put out by, say, like an app. Like there's Authy, there's Google Authenticator, and that creates very time-specific codes that you can use. And also, just in case you ever say like an app, because you would use an app, for that, for that kind of second factor authentication. If anything ever happened to your app, you would, like Google would give you backup codes or whatever, whoever you use it with, like Patreon has second factor authentication. They give you backup codes just in case anything ever happens to your app and you cannot get into, you can't get into your account. So there's that option. Then there's the other option, which is popularized by, say, YubiKey, which that's a company. And YubiKey has a scheme called FIDO. Now, I don't mean scheme in a bad way. I mean, like that's the way the authentication, it's an authentication scheme called FIDO, where they actually have, and it's in the name, YubiKey, okay, where you plug in an actual USB like little device, and that acts as your second factor authentication. As soon as the device you plug it into recognizes the YubiKey, the physical hardware device, then it will unlock everything for you. And this gets used, this is somewhat popular. Chrome, the web browser Chrome itself, can use a YubiKey. And it also, if you're using a Chromebook, of course, that can also recognize a YubiKey. There's a lot of different pieces of software that can work with the YubiKey. It's not very popular. It's more popular than some, but it's certainly not the most popular thing to do. And then the fourth one is almost about to be released. As far as I know, it's pretty much done. They're just working largely on, say, user interface and user experience and all this. And that is something actually devised by a personal hero of mine. And he's way up in the top 10, in the pantheon of my household gods, as it were. And that's Steve Gibson of the Security Now podcast, who's just a brilliant, what's the term I want to use? I don't know if I want to call him a computer scientist, researcher. This guy has, just an amazing mind. But of course, he's best known for making SpinRite, which is, a hardware utility and repair tool that's been around for decades. Just a brilliant guy, and certainly somebody that I pay attention to, whenever he cares to say anything. And he created what's called Squirrel. And this is it's SQRL. Squirrel is the idea is that you have, it's kind of a mixture as far as I understand it. And maybe there's a chance that some of the implementation has changed recently and I hadn't kept such a close eye on it, but the idea behind Squirrel, and I think this is really going to take off once it's officially out there and released. People are going to, want to be a part of it. And he's just releasing it out there. It's going to be open. People can do whatever they want with it. It's not like he's going to make a buck off of it or anything. He's not selling it. So all it takes is for enough people to demand that it get implemented. And I recommend, as we're going to break down more as far as what's happening with two-factor authentication. I certainly recommend that when it does come out, I will let you know. And then I think the campaign needs to start for everybody to start messaging Amazon, Google, Microsoft, go down the list of the companies, and saying, you need to implement Squirrel right now. Okay, because it's a brilliant little idea. Now, the reason how Squirrel works, and I'll describe this, okay, because the previous ones that I mentioned have various issues, and I'm going to get into the issues on those. But before I do, I just want to say, look, there is a solution, and it's very much on the way. How Squirrel's going to work is that you're going to have two devices. One of them is your smartphone, and that's why this had never been tried before. That's why it never really been thought of before, because before now, the idea of people having more than just their computer was not a thing that would make this really viable. So what you'll do is you'll be doing effectively a handshake. If you've ever done, and I mean a technical handshake, if you've ever had, let's say you set up Signal, which, by the way, I'll mention this on Cybernetech Prime, but Signal, the Open Whisper Systems said they are going to going to try and lessen and drop the dependencies on Google Play services, which is great, which is one of my major critiques of Signal, and I know a lot of Cybernetech listeners are critical of it because of that. But that's great, because that's a huge boon for Dark Android. So very excited that's going to, that's going to be a thing, hopefully in the near future here. Anyway, but let's say you're setting up Signal. Let's say you're using, the Chrome app of Signal, okay, which allows you to use Signal from your desktop. Okay, what you'll have to do is you've probably set this up. You go into your settings on the Signal app and you say, okay, scan QR code, on the computer. And what it does is that the Signal app itself scans the QR code, and that is the handshake that says, that shares the keys that says, okay, this is fine. Your information can be shared with the Signal app on your desktop. Okay, for Chrome. Now, I'm not going to talk about are there technical issues necessarily with that as far as, what's going to be seen as far as all your text messaging and all that, and the fact that that app is still effectively in beta, not the Signal app proper on Android and iOS, but the Signal Chrome app is, as far as I know, is still very much in beta. So I'm not going to talk about that, but I'm just using it as an example of how really this would work, is that you would have you would have a website. When it asks for your login credentials, it would come up with, effectively with the QR code, and you would set that up with Squirrel, and that would do, the very secure handshake that doesn't have to transmit over any networks whatsoever. So there's no man in the middle. Okay, there, and you could put your phone, you could put that camera as close to the screen as you want, to make sure, that there isn't even a mosquito drone flying between the two, right? So there's no man in the middle, and it secures, a lot of the issues that could potentially exist with other forms of second factor authentication, and it also removes the need for passwords. Now, Squirrel itself, again, I'm not giving you a complete overview of Squirrel, but it does have a singular password that you have to write down on a piece of paper or something that will allow you that works as a backup or as a future login in case you lose the device that you use as your authenticator for Squirrel. Okay, so that's a great option of what to do. And that's part of the question here is what are the recommendations for dealing with the flaws that have recently been coming up with second factor authentication? Well, this new way of doing it, this new way of authenticating and of really even replacing passwords is in many ways the best solution that I can think of right now. So I can't wait for it to come out. And again, we'll need to make a stink as soon as once it's out there. We need to make a stink with the companies to get them to start accepting it. Now, speaking of one of the other possibilities for second factor authentication, that being YubiKey saw Squirrel in action, and as far as I understand it, like they had a look of horror because they were pretty much like, well, this is going to put us out of business. Because they recognized just how brilliant it was. So what are the problems with YubiKey as far as second factor authentication goes? First off, you have what could potentially be a similar issue with Squirrel, to where you're not going to have that mass adoption. Okay, you're like not everybody accepts FIDO, or the YubiKey. The other thing is that there is a cost for a YubiKey, anywhere from $20 to say $40, $50, depending on whether or not it actually uses NFC, which that's interesting. Is that some YubiKeys actually have an NFC chip in them to where that they can unlock things that way, and you could use it with your phone, and you could just pair and unlock a device or unlock an app or share a password, whatever, just using NFC. Are there problems with trusting NFC? Sure, potentially there are. Okay, that allows for man in the middle, right? So that that could potentially be seen as problematic. But really, YubiKey overall, I think, actually works really, really well, and there's some interesting software built around it. It's just the major problem with YubiKeys is that they haven't been widely accepted. And also, again, the reason why it hasn't been widely accepted because people don't want to lay out $40, for the key. I mean, most people just can't afford to do that. It's where anybody can afford to download the completely free, Google Authenticator app onto their phone. So, adoption's the kind of the major issue there. Not to say that there haven't been intriguing, experimental potential cracks with YubiKey, but certainly it's outside of Squirrel, which isn't out in the wild yet. It's probably the best option is to go with the YubiKey. If you can afford it, if you can set it up, that's the way you want to go to solve a lot of these second factor authentication problems. We haven't even gotten into what necessarily is the problem, but we will. Speaking of, the next option down that we talked about, which is using an authenticator app. Okay, not SMS, but an actual authenticator app. Now, an authenticator app, okay, is also a nice option, honestly, but there can be problems there, and the main problem is what app do you use? Okay, and there's one in particular called Authy, which allows you. So there's two issues here with using an authenticator app. Okay, the primary issue that happens, and this happens to people, and that's why something like Authy was created. I'll describe this in a second. Okay, with Authy, what happens is that people either they didn't actually make their backup codes, or they lose their backup codes. With that 6-digit number that you need to put in. When second-factor authentication asks you for a number. You either lost that and then you lost your device as well. Something happens to where you just don't have access, okay, to the backup keys or to the keys required, to the authenticator app in general. And I can see a million reasons why that would happen to even the most careful person, all the time. I mean, it's not uncommon. So you run into, that, not to say that there's necessarily an insecurity, in the idea, in the implementation of the authenticator app. Okay, especially when it runs on such a short timeline, and recently they've expanded. One issue that they had was that authenticator apps were only and second factor authentication was only asking for a 4-digit code. Well, now largely they've expanded to 6 and even beyond that, because it's a lot easier. Just jumping from 4 digits to 6 digits, just creates orders of magnitude greater protection. Against, say, brute forcing and, guessing passwords and all, or, guessing the digits and all that. But they knew that you could effectively kind of brute force the digits more or less that you would put into a second factor authentication window. And so that's why there's a very strict timeline as for how long, say, these codes, these 4-digit codes are now 6-digit codes actually work. And usually it's around 30 seconds, if not less. That way there's theoretically not enough time to break what the code is. Okay. So now those authenticator apps work fine now, but the problem is that you can lose the app, you could lose the device, you could lose the piece of paper with the backup codes, you could lose, with the email. And then really, if you're putting the backup codes in an email, well, who's got your backup codes and who could crack into that just by getting into your email, say. Even worse, if it's in your email, right? You have the backup codes saved in an email or something. What if you can't access your email because you don't have the backup codes to get into, say, your Gmail account or something, right? So there's a problem there. So a solution that has come into being, okay, which resolves another issue that I'll talk about in a second, is called Authy, okay, and it's AUTHY. Now, what this does is it creates an encrypted store. It's effectively like LastPass for your authentication for your authenticators, okay. And you can access it on, you download the app onto your phone. And what's really interesting too is that it knows, depending upon how a site implements working with Authy, and it's very popular. Humble Bundle uses it, Coinbase uses it, uses Authy specifically, or has Authy integration specifically. I mean, you can use any authenticator app you want, but you get a little extra features when you use Authy. What'll happen is that it can send a push notification to your phone, like say when you try to log into Coinbase, that says, oh, here you go. You tap this to get your Coinbase, authentication token or, code. Which is, convenient to be sure. Also, it is cloud stored. It's encrypted. I mean, we don't know that the encryption is open source or anything, but it is encrypted. And so you can, if you lost your device, but you have your password for getting into Authy, then, just like with LastPass, if you have your password, you can, install the extension for LastPass or the app, and then you can use it anywhere, right? Same idea with Authy, except it just controls all your authenticators. If you have your password, you can log into it anywhere. And it has the added advantage of there's not a lot of, there's barely any, and usually they're like little private projects, which you might want to be a little concerned about, where you can have an authentication app on your desktop. Okay. Authy allows for that. It has a Chrome extension that allows you to access all that, right in your Chrome extension. Now, here's the problem though with that. Okay. So it's nice. It has a desktop app. It backs up, all of your authentication accounts, that there's a convenience there. But again, there's always that trade-off between security and convenience, right? Always. You can't avoid it. At least not right now. It doesn't seem avoidable. So what can happen is that first off, I don't blame you for not entirely trusting Authy and their encryption, okay, of everything you've got. I mean, we've seen certainly where, again, similar implementations, just maybe for a different thing, like say LastPass, where LastPass has been cracked, in the past. I mean, supposedly no passwords got out and all this, but so there's issues there once you're cloud storing a lot of, effectively your authentication tokens. And that creates all kinds of man-in-the-middle attacks that could be problematic. That creates, the potential to just get access to your account and log into it anywhere. That's where if you're just using, say, Google Authenticator or maybe like Microsoft Authenticator, they have one now too. If you're just using that, it's only on that device, and the only way anybody's going to get your codes is if they have if they have your actual, your second device that has all the authentication tokens on it. Okay. So Authy solves problems, but then at the same time, it creates a million more. Okay, but there's a very real problem, that Authy's trying to solve with authentication tokens and with an authentication app, that if you lose the device, if you don't have the backup codes, you're fucked. And it is absolutely in the best interest of a company like Google and others to not help you when you call them up or email them or whatever and say, hey, I lost my authentication app. I can't get into my, I can't get into my email or, into my Bitcoin or, Bitcoin wallet or whatever. In fact, I've talked about this before. I talked about this actually. I talked about this about 3 years ago on Sovereign Tech, where even though, and this is going to get in nicely to the problems with two-factor authentication that have come up recently. This had to do with a very benevolent little organization that has helped out, particularly in the Liberty community, over and over and over again at many events and all this. But they had a wallet with a Bitcoin company. And that, because of the customer service at that Bitcoin company, this little organization lost all their Bitcoins because somebody emailed the customer service and customer service gave them the keys to the kingdom of their Bitcoin wallet. And they lost like 20 some odd Bitcoins or something, which right now, how much would that be worth? Oh, 20,000 or however many it was. I talked about this 3 years ago. And I'll say it here. The company is blockchain, blockchain.info, blockchain.com. And and this is what's happened recently. And this is the concern, because we're going to talk now about the fourth option. And there's more, but these are the big four. The fourth option for second factor authentication. And this is through SMS. Okay. And what happened is there's a few different people, Steve Waterhouse, there's a few others, kind of, Michael Winkelspect, some big names in the Bitcoin space, and who are probably holding quite a bit of Bitcoin, quite frankly. And they had things set up to where they had second factor authentication turned on. Generally, it was SMS authentication. And their wallets got cracked into, and people walked away with all that Bitcoin. Now, but let's be really clear here that these issues I'm about to describe and a lot of the concerns over second factor authentication solely refer to SMS. Okay, solely refer to text messages that you get with authentication. Has nothing to do with the other three that I described. Okay, not to say that there aren't potential problems or real problems with the other three that we just went over, but SMS is where the real issue is. Now, there's a lot of things that can happen with SMS. There are man-in-the-middle attacks that can happen that would allow people to actually, say, read your text messages, among other things, okay? Those are realities, but it doesn't have to be actually that hard. You don't have to go breaking out effectively not a Wi-Fi, but a wireless signal, pineapple or something to be able to get access to this sort of stuff. All you need to do is just know the phone number of your target, of the person you're going after, say that you want to get their Bitcoins. Know their phone number, and then you can port the phone number to another service. Okay? And this happens so easily, and it's the same thing like I just described, where what a person does is they don't actually do any quote-unquote hacking. They just do some social engineering to where they call up Verizon or they call up whoever. And this really happened. There's people who did tests. In fact, Steve Waterhouse did tests on this. Steve Waterhouse used to be with Pantera Capital. Anyway, like he did a test where he saw, okay, how easy is it for me to say port, my phone number to another service, which, that way, say a potential person wanting to take all that Bitcoin, once they have control of your phone number, they can get all the second factor authentication codes that you normally get to SMS. They can get it themselves, and then they just, waltz right in. So, and it's very easy to do. In fact, Waterhouse was describing that, pretty much he called up Verizon and he's like, oh yeah, I want to port it to this, and it was all a test. And like the guy was asking for, his password, and the guy said, Waterhouse, or the service rep was saying, okay, could you, you want to port your number? Fine. Could you please give me, could you give me your password for the account and all this stuff, right? Or whatever information was exactly needed for the account. And he's like, oh yeah, I don't have it. Again, he's testing out the service rep at Verizon. It's a true story. And, after a minute or two, effectively the service rep, who's just there doing their job, admittedly, gets frustrated themselves and says, all right, look, just give me the last 4 digits of social security number, which how easy is it to get that? It's very easy for anybody. Okay. And in Waterhouse just starts saying, wait a minute. It's just, I'm just going to hand that to you. It's just that easy. And then that would have gotten them through. So you see, he didn't even have to have the password. Just had to know enough. And it's so easy to get a lot of that information, or it's easy to get, let's say, when you're trying to deal with Verizon, say to port a phone number over, okay, so that you get access to what your mission here, if you're the attacker, okay, your mission here is to get access to the phone number. Okay, and then by getting access to the phone number, you get the SMS codes, all right, to be able to get through second factor authentication. Okay, so Waterhouse starts freaking out. Like, what do you mean? You can just do that? And yeah, they can just do that. So there's an issue. Again, the main issue though is just with SMS two-factor authentication. And it's not necessarily with the other forms of second factor authentication. But that's all it takes. And then, once it's ported, and the person will probably never know that it's been ported. And how long does it take, to get it ported and then, try logging into, I don't know, whatever web wallet or whatever the hell's going on. That's the point I was going to bring up is that, well, say even if you need to reset the password or something, you can have interactions, especially if it's a high profile target. You can converse with them. Hell, you could talk to them on Facebook Messenger, I don't know, wherever. You can converse with them and ask them, like say you're a reporter or something, and you could say, oh yeah, I want to do this story about you, could you, and you ask them some personal questions, and those personal questions could be the very questions you need to, get to the point to where you can reset, a password on a various service or website. So you see, like this, it's just all social engineering. It's not necessarily there's a technical thing. There are huge technical problems with SMS that get proven more and more every year. And it's really like, it's a system that kind of needs to die. So, but, it doesn't need to, I like having some legacy systems and legacy technologies around, don't misunderstand me. But I agree it needs to die as far as, second factor authentication goes. Now I've recommended it in the past just because it's, so here's the question. Why do so many people, like even Google, some of the biggest companies that have to be very concerned about security, why are they still using second factor authentication via SMS? Why are they even offering it? Well, the reason being is that a lot of people still have dumb phones, and that's okay. That's a good thing. In my opinion, that's a good thing. Okay. That people still have dumb phones. And so the reason I ever recommended using it was because if you were going with a dumb phone setup, okay, that it's certainly better to have that than to not. Okay. Because we saw how easy it is, for somebody to figure out how they want to, how they want to like reset your password and get the answers to your secret questions and all this shit. Okay. So, offering it through SMS, I think it's still kind of a viability, but we definitely need to get beyond that. But frankly, as long as dumb phones are a thing, it's always going to be an offered option. So where the fault really lies is with these big companies. Okay. And this is a problem with having big companies in the first place, is that, you can't possibly manage, you can't really micromanage security in such a way. In fact, this is something I brought up many times on Sovereign Tech, saying, look, when you have a company like Sony Pictures, Like, remember the big Sony Pictures of America hack that happened? What was it, last year? All those movies got leaked and all these different documents and all that shit. I mean, the leaks are still coming from that. Here's the thing. When a company gets to a certain size, you fucking can't secure it. I'm telling you, you cannot. I mean, this is one of the biggest arguments. I know there's people who, anarchists / libertarians that want to say, oh, no, there can be big business. There can be big companies in a free market and all this stuff. Just from a security standpoint, you don't want that. Or you need to set things up. Maybe there's a system called sociocracy. Has nothing to do with socialism, okay? But it's called Sociocracy, which I recommend people read about if they want to. I think there's a great book on it called For a Deeper Democracy. You can't get the ebook of it. You have to buy the physical book. I have a copy, but I haven't turned it into an ebook yet. Anyway, unless you set up, say, things like that to where, a company has various cells and all this different shit, you can't secure the stuff. So like inherently, not necessarily because SMS is a bad technology or that two-factor authentication is a bad technology, but just because you really cannot control the level of security within a company of that size, you're almost guaranteed to get social engineered. It's one of the most simple arguments against big business, okay, is that, look, you cannot guarantee security anywhere near the level you can if you're just doing, a 13 to 20 man, person team. Which I've said that over and over again, that's like the sweet spot, especially in our digital age where a computer can turn one person, or give one person the ability to do the work of 100. A 13 to 20 person team is just dynamite. I mean, that's just gold, golden to have. So now, again, SMS, if it's the best option or if it's the only option for you to have, yes, use it rather than not have second factor authentication. But if you have the option, if you use a smartphone or if the service gives you the choice, then you really, really want, you either use a YubiKey or, use an authenticator app. Authy has its issues, but for some people, maybe you think that's acceptable enough. It's certainly better than not using second factor authentication if you want to use Authy. But Google Authenticator is fine. There's just Auth in the F-Droid store. Microsoft Authenticator is a thing out there. Google Authenticator, interestingly, is almost completely. In fact, I think it's completely open source. So that one's fine and dandy to use. If you're using dark Android, then you have to go with Auth, and it's just called AUTH. That's available in the F-Droid store. But you want to be careful. You want to do a quick DuckDuckGo / just do a quick search online with whatever app you think you want to try, and just see if there are any complaints about it. Okay, you can ask me if you want. If there's a specific one you want me to try to see how it does, message me on Patreon or on Twitter, however, and I'll look into it. Okay, and I'll see what if it's up to snuff, and I'll let you know. Okay, but just anytime you're looking at some kind of app, it never hurts to do a quick search about it and see what people are saying. And how any of what they say resonates with you as far as any negatives go, or really as far as any positives go. So there. I hope that answered the question, Messenger. Let me know, or emailer. Let me know if it didn't, and if it didn't, I can go into much deeper detail describing it. But that's the thing, is that there are solutions. Two-factor authentication is still the way to go. And at the end of the day, I just can't wait. And I know I've been saying it for 2 years or maybe longer, ever since Steve Gibson announced it. I cannot wait for Squirrel to be out there. And I think, I know some people have argued against Squirrel, but I really think the arguments against it, they just don't understand how it works. So that's going to be the grand solution. But how are we going to get that? How are we going to even be able to use it? Well, it's not because it's not developed, because it's pretty much done. It's going to require people saying to companies, demanding the companies, the services, the websites that they go to start using it. Okay. I'm going to make a stink with Patreon. If there's a WordPress plugin and there's certain parts of my site that need to be locked down, I'm going to be I'm going to be implementing that. I'm going to make sure it's a part of everything very, very quickly. So I hope that answered your question. Next point is that, speaking of implementing things, I am going to have and I want to have it actually by the end of this, or by this weekend, I am going to create a Zcash donation address, a shielded Zcash donation address for Sovereign Tech and Sex and Science Hour. So if you want to, if you want to donate some Zcash or something, I'm going to make that available here very, very soon. So, all right, let's, and actually I know people have already asked if they could donate Zcash, and I didn't want to, I mean, it's easy to set up a transparent wallet. You can just do that with Jax. But I wanted, go the whole way. Let's do shielded. Let's do this right. That's what Sovereign Tech's all about, right? Best practices. It's about doing it right. God damn it. So, okay. We're an hour in. So I'm actually going to push off, and I apologize. Maybe I will do a specific episode where I just cover Christmas versus Kalenda. How about that? Maybe that'll make good. I'll do that this week. And so I'm going to push off the Christmas versus Kalenda question, and I am going to talk about, I got a question actually just earlier today about Star Wars. And so Star Wars has been the hot topic as late, and of course, in honor of the, inimitable and amazing Carrie Fisher, having passed away, like we mentioned earlier in the show, I think it's fitting to talk up some Star Wars. So anyway, let me read the question here, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about Carrie Fisher too. Because I don't know if I'm definitely dedicating episode 206 of Sovereign Tech to Carrie Fisher. But I don't know, how much I'm going to get into that on the show. Maybe I'll get into it, more in depth there as well. But here's the question. And this question actually this is great. This question came from the Patreon page itself. Okay. There's the community section. You just click the little community tab and it takes you right into where people can share stories, post stuff. People can talk to each other. In fact, I had a guy, let me mention this. I had a guy mention he had an idea, and it's right here on the page. It's Jay. So I'm not, letting any cats out of the bag. And it says, would anybody in this group be interested in VR content? I've got both the Vive and the Rift with touch capital T, it's the controllers now, and would be willing to do some videos, reviews, or what have you for you folks, patrons only. Now, and I responded to him because that's the nice thing is it effectively works like Facebook in a way where I can like it or heart it and and I can respond to it. And I said I think this is an awesome idea, and I'll mention on a future episode to try and gauge interest. Thanks for offering. I think it's a cool idea, and I think it's a fucking awesome idea. I mean, if people if any listeners, if any of you want to to do this sort of thing, I'll check it out, do a demo for me. I'll check it out. And if I think it's great, I'll get it out there through the channels that we've got. I'll put it out there on Twitter. I mean, I've got about 7,000 followers on Twitter. It's not a bad little audience, and on other social media, there's some followers. I'll put it out there. I'll put it in the Patreon feed. It'll be there for everybody, for every Sovereign Tech patron to check out. I won't put it out there for free like Jay wanted to do it patrons only. But when you share something from Patreon that is for patrons only, Patreon does this really slick thing where you can share the link, but it puts up a picture that says, whatever Patreon patrons only. And I really, really like that. So yeah, I think this is an awesome idea. You can let me know what you think, or you can find Jay's post. It's from December 21st on the community page at sovereigntech.com, which is just the Patreon page. And let him know what you think. I think it's awesome. I'm totally on board for that. And if you have an idea you want to do too, you just let me know. And I know I've gotten the emails and messages from people, from Sovereign Tech listeners. You're brilliant. I mean, you really are. You have great ideas, and you've asked me about them, and I tell you what I think. And I hear some of the best ideas ever all the time. So anyway, let me let's see. There was a fun. Oh, boy, this is a great question that I should have gotten into. There's one about Lady Thor here. I'll have to save that for another time. One person did ask, what did I think about Luke's Change? Luke's Change is this mockumentary made. It's on YouTube where it's supposed to be like Loose Change, the 9/11 Inside Job documentary. And Luke's Change is supposed to be like that the Death Star was an inside job. I'm gonna talk. I'll talk about this for 1 second. First off, I love the YouTube video. I think it's brilliant. It's hilarious. Very well done how they made that to where the claim is that, well, not that this is the exact way or that it was done. But what's funny is that now we know. Spoiler alert, folks. Spoiler alerts. If you haven't seen Rogue One, spoiler alerts. Okay, pause. Okay. Really, the Death Star was an inside job. Like Galen Erso, fucked the thing up. It was, well, I mean, it wasn't exactly like an inside job, like some people say 9/11 was, but this was something where, the Imperials themselves, set it up for failure, or at least Galen Erso did, and he was effectively an Imperial. Which again, I've checked out Rogue One more than once now, and boy, that movie just gets better and better. It really is something. So anyway, so I enjoyed Luke's change, in case you're wondering about that. And I'm going to have to get into that Lady Thor question in the future, which a lot of people, thank you so much, have really loved. In fact, let me read this quick, and then I will get into it's not a Star Wars question. It's going to take long. But let me get to this here. Let's see. Where? Here we go. You didn't, I know you're not paying for me to say where, but I'm doing it. Okay. Hey, Brian, love the top 8s. The first comic book one is awesome. That's what made me think of it. It's because I just did a Sovereign top 8 where I covered Marvel and DC, even though there's a million things I didn't get into with Marvel and DC, especially that I thought of afterward. I was like, oh, damn it. I should have talked about that. So I could do a Marvel and DC 2 if I wanted, but I don't know if I'm going to go that route. Anyway, it's going to be a whole series where I cover different comic book companies and independent imprints and all that, and kind of the best that they've delivered, characters, moments, series, all of that. The first comic book one is awesome. Can't wait for the rest. I tried reading some of the DC Marvel comic books as a kid, but it always seemed like there was so much backstory. I didn't know I couldn't get into it. I did have a collection of Ren and Stimpy comics, though. Jode. I love Ren and Stimpy. But anyway, reading on with it. How about a top 8 tabletop games? I'm also curious if you have a favorite tabletop game creator. I'm fond of Final Fantasy Flight games, as they have a few games that can be played solo, as I have no friends since moving out to, wherever they moved. I won't reveal that. And my boyfriend's not a gamer. He does work with a guy who's a Star Wars super fan and loves all of Fantasy Flight Star Wars games. So I just want you to know, listener, that absolutely, yes, I will end up doing that. A top 8 like that. But I want other listeners to know, if you have a top 8 recommendation you want me to do, because actually the comic book one was also a recommendation from a listener, just say the word. And if it's a topic that I can speak to, and I can speak to a few, I'll definitely do a top 8 on the matter. So most of the recent top 8s have been recommended by a listener, like someone wanting to know, like the one that I did about movies that weren't science fiction. That was from a listener as well, from a patron particularly. So anyway, thank you. Yeah, I will get into that. Now let's get into the question that was put on the community page on Patreon here for Sovereign Tech. And it's Brian, is a guy that's old enough to have seen A New Hope for the first time around. Of course, that would have been 1977, but never got into the rest of the lore. Can you recommend for me what books to check out first? If it helps, I prefer audiobooks, as that's just how my life works. Okay, so I want to break this down. Some of this I've covered in past Sovereign Tech episodes, but these things are worth readdressing, often enough. And I actually replied. This is the beauty of using the Patreon page itself, is that I was able to quickly reply to him right underneath his comment on the community page. And he loved it. He said, "Thank you, sir, getting them now." So anyway, now, I want to address the thing with the audiobooks. And I've said this before. Audiobooks really, it's not just whether or not you prefer audiobooks. Audiobooks, in my opinion, is the preferred way to experience Star Wars stories. Like, they're best as that. This is a kind of a funny subject, okay? Over the years, over the decades, I have developed a theory, or an opinion, I guess, that Star Wars actually really, it can work especially with great authors like James Luceno and Claudia Gray, some of the newer people that they've brought on over the years. But like, one thing that happened in the 90s when with the old expanded universe, not the new canon, which is what this person was asking about, and that's what I'm going to get into. But with the old expanded universe, they brought in a lot of authors that honestly, like, they just weren't Timothy Zahn. Timothy Zahn revitalized Star Wars. Star Wars is here today. People still are passionate about Star Wars, in my opinion, because of Timothy Zahn, and in many ways, Timothy Zahn alone. Okay? Really, it's Timothy Zahn and Dark Horse, but I'll explain more on that in a second. So, most of the writers for the old expanded, like I mean, not that they weren't, like Michael A. Stackpole was good. There were some of them that were pretty good. And now there's the one who wrote Kenobi, and that's terrible. I can't think of his name. It's a 3-word name, but anyway, there's some great authors there. I'm not saying there isn't. Okay. But the novels didn't always work. For Heir to the Empire, for that whole trilogy, the Thrawn trilogy, it really worked. And maybe it was just because of the time, honestly. Because even later on, when there was like the Hand of Thrawn duology, not the best stuff in the world, even though it was written by Timothy Zahn. It did work, the anthologies, like they had those Tales anthologies, like Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina, Tales of the New Republic, Tales of the Empire. Those all became a big deal in the 90s. It worked there, and you had a bunch of different authors, and that was really cool. But, largely, I don't think Star Wars works as a long-form, novel. Because it's a very visual experience. Like, Star Wars is super, super visual. Now, where Star Wars has always shined, and where it was always a natural fit, which is why the Marvel series was so successful back in the 80s, late 70s and 80s, is as a comic book, because comic books give you that visual element. And so Star Wars, in my opinion, Star Wars stories have always shined the brightest, minus, say, the Timothy Zahn trilogy. And Shadows of the Empire was great too, but that was a very unique, Shadows of the Empire worked for a few different reasons, but Shadows of the Empire also had a comic book. It also had a video game. It had a soundtrack. It had a whole multimedia experience. So it didn't just rely upon the novel. And the novel was also a pretty short read. Like I remember reading Shadows of the Empire inside of a day. So, so it worked because it was a shorter form fiction, and it was sexy as fucking hell too. But and notice, I've always said this, that when I said that when they announced that the old expanded universe was going away, the 3 things I wanted them to save were only one of them was a book, and that was Shadows of the Empire. But that's because Shadows of the Empire, again, it's not just a novel. I didn't need any of the novels saved. I read all of them. It's not that. It's just that I'll admit it. I didn't think that Star Wars necessarily works as a novel. Now today that's a little bit different because I've read Star Wars books as well as listened to them as audiobooks, and it's a little bit different now. Like James Luceno's got a really good, just has a great cadence, and like the Darth Plagueis book is phenomenal. That's from the old expanded universe, but it's still a great read. Claudia Gray is fucking brilliant and like so easy to read. So you have a great writer there that brings a lot to the table to Star Wars. So her books kind of work. But admittedly, I still think it's true that Star Wars doesn't really work as a novel. Now, interestingly, Star Trek, I'm not going to go on a big side tangent here. Star Trek is the exact opposite, to where Star Trek novels are awesome. Star Trek novels work so well. Okay, Star Trek works in the written form. But Star Trek comic books are very touch and go. Very, very touch and go. The only time Star Trek comic books, like the Marvel Paramount series from the late 90s was really good, but the only time it really works is when you're getting something that you just can't get anywhere else. But if you are, just reading comic books about, say, the Next Generation crew, or the DS9 crew or something like that, the comic books don't really, they don't exactly work. As to where the novels are just fantastic. So it's interesting that you have that those, the 2 biggest franchises arguably of all time as far as science fiction goes, or I know Star Wars is science fantasy or space opera, blah, blah, blah. As far as speculative fiction goes, how about that? That they work in opposite spectrums. And I wonder what that has to say about fans as well. Like, maybe there's fans that are a little more visual or something. Not that makes it inferior. It's just different. Okay. That's all. It's just very different. Another place where Star Wars works really well is with Star Wars Insider. Now, Star Wars Insider has been publishing since Disney. They did it beforehand too, but ever since Disney bought out Lucasfilm, Star Wars Insider has been publishing canon short stories, like short stories that are absolutely official. In fact, the most recent issue of Star Wars Insider, they had it was the December issue, I think, they had a story about Orson Krennic from Rogue One. It was awesome. Just short fiction. It worked beautifully. It delivered some interesting information. I thought it was awesome. So you want to check out Star Wars Insider as well. If you want to get like nice little tidbits, of Star Wars fiction that actually matters. And a lot of the stories do, they're fun. So anyway, all of that said, the main point is that the best way, really, outside of, say, the comic books, and the comic books are great too. And if you want to start reading the comic books, start with the Lando series. That's definitely the best one going. And the Darth Vader series is all right, but the Lando series is just, it's 5 issues, tremendous, if you can get your hands on that. But the best way to experience, outside of the comic books, the Star Wars stories, and again, the comic books are touch and go, is through audiobooks. And this is where there is no touch and go. All of them are phenomenal. All of them are a great experience. I mean, the one novel that I don't think you need to read is A New Dawn, which was A New Dawn was the novel written as kind of a prequel to Star Wars Rebels. The reason I say you don't really need to read it is like the purpose of that book was very clear. And this is the thing with Star Wars novels, is a lot of them have a purpose. Like there's a reason that they exist. There's things that you can kind of get it after you read them, like, okay, what was this for? And you know what it's for. Star Wars Rebels, or A New Dawn, the book A New Dawn, was definitely made to, how to put this, was definitely made to, introduce you to these characters before the show came out. That was the purpose of A New Dawn. So if you already know the characters, like if you already watched 3 seasons of Rebels, frankly, you don't really need to read A New Dawn anymore. I mean, you can if you want, especially as an audiobook, because again, an audiobook, you can listen to at greater speeds. Like if you can listen to an audiobook at 2x or 2.3x, you can get through any Star Wars book easily inside of a day, inside of a work day. I mean, like 5 hours, you can be done with them. So that's awesome. And the beauty of the audiobooks, admittedly, is that they put in all the music, they put in a lot of the sound effects, they do all of this different stuff that really brings it alive. I mean, you're going to hear the lightsabers, you're going to hear the blasters, you're going to hear all this stuff. And even the voice actors try and emulate, they do a fair job. There's some real editing going on. I mean, these are full on radio theater that you're listening to in a very real sense when you listen to audiobooks of Star Wars novels. So it's just the best way to experience them. And again, it makes them all come alive. I mean, maybe some of these don't work as actual novels still, kind of like my theory suggested, but as audiobooks, nope, they're fantastic. They're great. And you can get all of them. Audible has pretty much all of them, even the shorter stuff. Like there's that little book called The Perfect Weapon that has to do with The Force Awakens. The only book that I think is important that doesn't have an audiobook, it's called Before the Awakening. And it has like 3 or 4 stories that has to do with a different main character in The Force Awakens. And like you learn a lot about, say, Finn, the character of Finn, played by John Boyega. You learn a lot about him in the story in Before the Awakening, which, as far as I know, does not have an audiobook. It's certainly not on Audible if it is out there. But everything else, even some of the more of the junior novels, which are interesting, like the Princess Leia adventure, which is definitely that's probably the best one of these, shall we say, junior novels. That book has to do with Princess Leia, and then they made another one. They made Smuggler's Run for Han Solo, and there was a Weapon of a Jedi for Luke. But Moving Target for Princess Leia is a great short read. You can listen to it, especially if it's a 2X. You can listen to it in like 2 hours. And that whole book is about how did they get the shuttle Tidarium that they end up with in Return of the Jedi. It's an awesome little read. So even the junior novels in Star Wars tell you important stories and important aspects of what happens, or how things ended up in the movies, let's say. Okay. So that's all good and well. But anyway, so yeah, audiobooks really is just the way to go. Now, what did I recommend to this, person as far as what to start reading? The first book, it's been the first book that I've recommended for a while, and it'll probably always be the first book that I think anybody should get into. Because I've had other patrons ask me this question. I don't know if I really talked about it on air, but anyway, the first book is Lost Stars by Claudia Gray. This is an awesome book. I mean, it doesn't concentrate on any of the major characters that you know from the original trilogy or either from the prequel trilogy. But what it does is that it gives you kind of an imperial view from 2 different, perspectives, but kind of both imperial. It gives you this perspective on what is happening in the original trilogy, what happens after episode 3 and all of that. It's a tremendous book, and it gives you so much understanding of like, why are they building another Death Star? Why are they, all these big questions. And also it probably has the most sex out of any Star Wars anything. which I got to give it credit for that, because, hey, I love sex. Claudia Gray is the new Timothy Zahn, even though Timothy Zahn, of course, is going to be writing a new novel for the new canon. He has the Thrawn book coming out in April, I think, 2017, which can't wait for that. So Lost Stars you want to start off with, especially if you're just a big fan of the original trilogy and you didn't care much for the prequel trilogy. It gives you a whole new perspective on those movies, and you will see those movies in a new light after you read Lost Stars. You'll have a lot more understanding. Of course, it's all posthumous. It's all, post-Lucas, shall we say. So it's Disney's interpretation in many ways of these events, but I think it really delivers, and I think it's a really, really cool book, and it's an exciting one, and it covers a large span of time, too. So Lost Stars is definitely, that's the first book anybody should read if they want to get into the new canon of Star Wars, as far as novels go. After that, I recommended Tarkin by James Luceno, and Tarkin is a great book, especially now. Like, after Rogue One, I want to reread Tarkin, because Rogue One gives you so much more Tarkin, and you get so much more of what's happening in around that time frame that the book Tarkin takes place. So I really think that would help flesh things out quite a bit. But it's a fun, well, I don't want to just say fun. It's an interesting adventure with Tarkin and Vader, and it's kind of how Tarkin meets Vader and all this. So it's great backstory for an area that's a hot property right now in the Star Wars universe, that being the time of Rogue One and A New Hope and all that. So I love that book. And in fact, that book in particular is the one that tells you, and this is such a huge piece of information, that tells you, why is the Emperor doing what he does? Why is this his path, with the dark side? Why did he create the Empire? Why did he do this? You get into that in the book Tarkin. It's worth that alone. But also there's the ship in Tarkin, the Carrion Spike, which I'll just say plays a later part in much of the Star Wars universe that a lot of people might not have noticed. Anyway, I'll say the word telex and that's it. So Tarkin's a great book to read. It's pretty close to the top of my list of my favorite Star Wars novel. I'll tell you what my favorite is in a second, even though I've said it before. But it's not, my favorite Star Wars novel is not the one that I would start off with. So the next book I recommended was Lords of the Sith by Paul S. Kemp. This is just a badass book. Like, this is a book, it's about Vader and Emperor Palpatine stranded on a planet, and they've got to survive. And it is such a cool book. And the badassery that gets put on display by Vader and the Emperor is totally, totally worth it. And you even get kind of the reactions, say, from like stormtroopers that are with them, or Imperial Guards, whatever. It's awesome, awesome novel. One of the best, that has come out in the new canon. So that was my number 3 pick that I said to check out. And then number 4 is Rogue One Catalyst, which is the prequel book to the movie Rogue One, which is hugely important to, I think, understanding a lot of what's happening in Rogue One. Catalyst, explains so much of that, from kyber crystals to all this different shit. So that's where I start off. And it's interesting. After I wrote that down, I was like, it's amazing. All those books, except for Lost Stars, but even part of Lost Stars takes place in this time frame. All of those books exist within the same time frame, and they're the ones where I would start off. And yeah, that's interesting. Not to say that you couldn't start, like, there's the Aftermath trilogy, which only 2 of those books have come out so far. The third one, I think, is next month in 2017. They're like by Chuck Wendig, the Aftermath trilogy. Like, those are important books, but they kind of suck. I mean, Life Debt's pretty good. The second ones are all right, but they're not like, I don't like the writing style. They're not that great. I mean, if you're listening to them, you don't mind it, but I don't know. Like, you'd think that'd be the best place to start is, okay, what happened after Return of the Jedi? But there's not a lot of great books about exactly what happened after Return of the Jedi. In fact, even the Aftermath trilogy is being really vague. Like, this third book's got to step up the fucking game, because there's just tons of people that about that you have no fucking clue, really what they're doing, who they are, what it's about. So yeah, it's interesting that the best books to start off with are all from this time in between episode 3 and episode 4. if you've now, so this answer can expand, because if you're somebody that watches Rebels or that watched the Clone Wars, then I'd probably add Ahsoka to this list. Because that book, gets into what happened to Ahsoka, and there's some interesting things at the very end of that book. But if you're not a fan of the Clone Wars, don't go with that. If you're a fan of the Clone Wars, now my favorite Star Wars novel of the new canon is actually Dark Disciple, by Christy Golden. Just fucking amazing. Now that it was based off of a script for a series of Clone Wars episodes, so maybe that's part of the reason why it's so damn good. But it has to do with Asajj Ventress and Quinlan Vos, and that is my favorite Star Wars novel of them all right now. Nothing has really unseated it. But you've got to be a fan of, well, you don't have to be a fan of Clone Wars, but it helps to be a fan of Clone Wars to know exactly what you're seeing there, because otherwise you don't really know who Asajj Ventress is. Or really Quinlan Vos, even though Clone Wars doesn't go into too much depth over who he is. He's more from the old expanded universe of comic books. So, I mean, and there's other books, beyond that I could go into. I mean, most of them are pretty good. Even what I was describing earlier, that sometimes these books have a purpose. The first new canon book that actually came out was Heir to the Empire. Or not, I'm sorry, Heir to the Jedi. Which is a Luke Skywalker adventure. And it's a weird book. It's not terrible, but it's not really great. I was really hoping there was going to be something amazing, but it was part of a last ditch trilogy before Disney bought Lucasfilm, where one book was concentrating on Han Solo, the other book was concentrating on Princess Leia, and then the third book was supposed to concentrate on Luke Skywalker. But Disney bought it midway with that trilogy getting released, and so those two previous books about Han Solo and Princess Leia are no longer canon. And so, it ended up being that the Luke Skywalker book that was written was going to be the first book of the new canon. And it was underwhelming. But understand, the reason why it was underwhelming was because they changed it. They had to change it quite a bit, really. It was never meant to be such a headliner. It was just the book that was ready for Disney to put it out there. And that book had a purpose, though, because that book goes into much more. What's interesting is that a lot of what gets described in that book tells you about really under Disney, what is the new science of the lightsaber. Not necessarily just under Disney, but what was becoming the new science of the lightsaber, how, you're getting away from the ideas of the Adagan crystals, and which is what they used to be. The Kyber crystal was a thing back in the 70s with Splinter of the Mind's Eye. It was spelled differently, but, Kyber crystals weren't always the order of the day. It used to be Adagan crystals. But this gets into, there's tons of conversations about how the Force works, how lightsabers work in this book. And I think that was the purpose of this book, was to inject all of those different ideas on how this is how the Force is going to work now. This is how lightsabers are going to work now, and, go forward. So even Heir to the Jedi, while not a great book, I don't like the way it's written. I mean, the audiobook is passable. It still has a purpose. It still has a point. And there's things in it that affect, the much broader canon that affects every part of the canon, really, because, again, it goes into much more depth about the Force and about lightsabers in general. So, you got to understand, even if it's a shitty story, it really has a purpose. So some of these books have you can really tell at the end of it, okay, why did they make this? Yeah, okay, you need to talk about this, or you need to lay this out, or something like that. Just like with Ahsoka, the novel of Ahsoka, there were certain things in that needed to be laid out. That had to do with lightsabers as well. So anyway, I think that's a good start for anybody. And once you get past Lost Stars, Tarkin, Lords of the Sith, and Rogue One Catalyst, then the sky's the limit. And if you listen to them as audiobooks, and especially if you can if you're able to speed up how you listen to these things, and it's okay if you don't want to, if you have the time to not do that, that's great. You're in for a real treat, because it's just like listening to radio theater. It's second best to watching a movie, in my opinion. They're so good as audiobooks. So, all right, that's it as far as that goes. The Carrie Fisher conversation, I think I will talk about that in episode 206 of Sovereign Tech. I just want to say that, right now, I just want to say that, wow, that hit me a lot harder than I thought it would. And, what a loss, what an absolute fucking loss. And as far as I know, as far as I understand it, she did finish episode 8, but she was, as far as rumors go, she was supposed to be in episode 9. So how that's going to work out, well, maybe they'll do what they did, what everybody's talking about that happened in Rogue One, where, you create a CGI, an overlay for like Tarkin and, whoever else. Maybe that's how they'll do things. I would not be opposed to that at all, because I'd much rather have, honestly, I would much rather have shitty CGI overlays or imperfect CGI overlays than not have my characters in these movies. That is way more important to me. And honestly, as far as, whether or not Carrie Fisher was going to be in another Star Wars movie or not was not the most important thing to me. The most important thing to me was that, well, I think it's true for a lot of people my age. For a lot of us, she was like kind of our first crush. Like, I mean, she was a big deal. As far as Star Wars characters goes, for a lot of us, I'll just talk about this briefly. I mean, for a lot of us, look, our parents weren't around. And when we're home, what do we do? Like, I mean, it's a trope because it's in many ways because it's true the idea that, well, parents just put their kids in front of the TVs and that way the parents could go and do their thing. Yeah, that's what happened. Well, guess what? What was on my TV? Fucking Star Wars all the fucking time. Between Star Wars and Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica and Ric Flair, woo, that's what was in front of me. And so in a lot of ways I say, these people raised me. These people are very close to me, even though they never met me. Fortunately, I was able to meet Carrie Fisher years ago. What a small woman. These people were really a part of our lives. And so when they go, yeah, it means something. In some ways it is like a family member going. It is like somebody close going because they've been there. And you grew up with them in a very real sense. And maybe they were there more than your fucking parents were. Or more than whoever was around that should have been around or wasn't around or whatever. So yeah, it hits. It's a shame. I don't know, Carrie Fisher was a woman that she had terrible, there's mental illness, there's, drug addiction, all these problems, and did a lot of that, finally, effectively, did the Piper need to get paid at age 60 on a flight from London? I mean, is that how that all, I don't know, but it sucks. It just sucks. So I'm not going to end this on a sour note, but one of the best ways, that you can really keep these characters alive, keep these stories alive. And in that way, I'm an atheist, but in that way, people in many ways stay alive. That they're still out there. They're still a part of us. They're still around, when these stories can get consumed. And the new canon has done a phenomenal job. As I've said before, Princess Leia is my favorite character, of the entire canon or the entire saga. And the new canon has done a phenomenal job of really concentrating on her and making her a big fucking deal, and rightfully so. So that's a wonderful thing that you get to experience in a lot of these, in a lot of these novels and comic books, and even in Star Wars Rebels. She was in Rebels. Yeah. So anyway, read this stuff. Check it out. If you're a fan, especially even if you're just casual, read one audiobook. Grab one audiobook on Audible or some other source. And because believe me, they're out there on other sources. You know what I mean? And, check it out. You might be surprised at just how goddamn good these stories are. In fact, that's another book. I'll recommend that. If you're into The Force Awakens, the book Bloodlines by Claudia Gray, who also did Lost Stars, that should be, if there was a number 5 on the list, it would be Bloodlines. And that whole story is about Princess Leia, and it's fucking great. Or about Senator Organa, well, anyway, that is a phenomenal, phenomenal book. So you do want to check that one out as well. It's Bloodlines by Claudia Gray. Very important book. I should have put that as number 5. So anyway, there you go. That's enough for this week's Q&A. I'm going to do a little special episode for you where I talk about Christmas and Kalenda and Saturnalia and all that. And we'll break down the history of it. Might not be a long one, but I think it's fun to get out there, and I want to deliver it to you. But we got to end this one up. So I'll see you on the other side, everybody.
You just experienced Sovereign Tech. Go to sovereigntech.com, that's SOVRYN tech.com, and connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovereign Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.